I heard them say, "We can hear you now." Sorry about that. Uh, our technical difficulty is so fun. I'm trying to get my screen here lined up, and I seem to be like slightly crooked, but okay. Good morning. That was fun, right? It was like an adventure where you get to lip read and then you can hear me for 3 seconds before then you have to come back to a different stream. Uh, Welcome again. But as I was saying that you didn't hear, Mike, that was awesome. Thank you. And you're awesome. Isn't Mike great? He really is. But no, that was really good. Thank you. And now that we've wasted a solid 3 minutes of technical difficulties, I'm going to go ahead and pray and then jump right in. Father, good morning. Thank you for all of this digital communication thing, even when it's a pain in the butt sometimes. But God, thanks for the fact that we can still use it. And when it does work, it's great. And it allows us to connect with one another, even at times like this when we can't physically connect with one another. God, I ask that you would take what I'm about to say and that you would use it, Father, that you would flow through me and that your words would come out, and that people would draw closer to you through it, that we might be more like you. In the name of Jesus, I ask. Amen. So we've been going through the book of Luke, and I need to move it that way. There we go. That's a little better. So we've been going through the book of Luke, and at one point, Darren was, I guess it was 2 weeks ago, was talking about Jesus being intentional in pretty much everything he says and does. And I agree. And today we're going to kind of go off of that, I guess. I can't think of the word I was looking for, but go off the idea of Jesus being intentional and intently focused as well. We're going to be in Luke 6, if you want to turn there. So we're going to Luke 6, 1 through 11. There's two stories here that are at different times, but they're connected. And in the synoptic gospels, which are Matthew, Mark, and Luke, oh, wait, over here, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they are connected in all three of them. And I find it interesting because they're at different times. By the way, synoptic, I had no idea what the word meant. Like, I knew what it means, but I didn't know what it means, you know? So I went and looked it up. It's Latin for seen together, because Matthew, Mark, and Luke they're kind of like three parallel accounts of stories. Like, they very much run in line with one another as far as timeline and the stories that are told. So they are seen together. Okay, there you go. If you get nothing else, you've learned Latin. Synoptic means seen together. But anyway, these two stories are in all three of the Gospels, and they are together in all three of those Gospels, the synoptic Gospels. John is another Gospel. It's not a synoptic Gospel. It's different. Okay. And they are together, I think, for a few reasons. We're going to go ahead and read. Well, I'm going to go ahead and read, and you can read along if you like. And we're going to go. Luke 6, 1 through 11. One Sabbath day, as Jesus was walking through some grain fields, his disciples broke off heads of grain, rubbed off the husks in their hands, and ate the grain. But some Pharisees said, "Why are you breaking the law by harvesting grain on the Sabbath?" Jesus replied, "Haven't you read in the scriptures what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He went into the house of God and broke the law by eating the sacred loaves of bread that only the priest can eat. He also gave some to his companions." And Jesus added, "The Son of Man is Lord, even over the Sabbath." On another Sabbath day, a man with a deformed right hand was in the synagogue while Jesus was teaching. The teachers of religious law and the Pharisees watched Jesus closely. If he healed the man's hand, they planned to accuse him of working on the Sabbath. But Jesus knew their thoughts. He said to the man with the deformed hand, "Come and stand in front of everyone." So the man came forward. Then Jesus said to his critics, "I have a question for you. Does the law permit good deeds on the Sabbath, or is it a day for doing evil? Is this a day to save life or to destroy it?" He looked around at them, one by one, and said to the man, "Hold out your hand." So the man held out his hand, and it was restored. At this, the enemies of Jesus were wild with rage and began to discuss what to do with him. So the two stories are together. They're not on the same day, um, obviously, because it says on another Sabbath. So we can assume they're at least a week apart, and chances are, if they were a week apart, then he would have said on the next Sabbath. So probably at least 2 weeks apart. So why are they connected? It's not like these were the only two Sabbaths that Jesus was doing things. I mean, his earthly ministry was about 3 years. So what's that? 156 Sabbaths roughly that he was hanging around doing stuff. And I highly doubt that there was nothing that happened between these two Sabbaths. I don't think they're connected though, just because they're on the Sabbath. I think they're connected in the focus of the characters in the story of both the Pharisees and Jesus. So, starting with the first one, Jesus and his disciples are walking through a grain field on Sabbath. Okay, the disciples are hungry, so they're just, as they're going along, they're grabbing some grain, rolling it to get off the husk and chuck it in their mouth. And the Pharisees come in and accuse them of breaking the law by harvesting on the Sabbath day. Quick reminder, Deuteronomy 5:12 through 14. Observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy, as the Lord your God has reminded you. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath day of rest dedicated to the Lord your God. The Sabbath law is one of the Big Ten. It's one of the Ten Commandments, one of the laws that God literally wrote in stone with his own finger to give to the Israelites. It is one of the foundations of their faith and of their identity as the people of God. In fact, the Sabbath itself, the Sabbath law, is identified as that which sets them apart as the people of God. So, when the disciples are picking heads of grain and eating it, the Pharisees, the guys with the religious authority, are accusing them of violating that law which has set them apart as the people of God for thousands of years. The one that fundamentally identifies them as his people. And this law carries the penalty of death. And the guys that are accusing the disciples are the ones that have the authority to pronounce judgment and punishment. So, that's what's going on here. These guys are hungry, walking through, grabbing some grain, and now they are literally on the brink of death for what they've done. And technically, the Pharisees are right. When God first gave the Sabbath commandment, one of the very first things about it was you don't gather food on the Sabbath. When they were wandering around the desert, when the Israelites were wandering around the desert for 40 years, he gave them manna, and he said, gather it on 6 days. On the sixth day, you gather enough for 2 days. You don't gather food on the Sabbath day. So when the Sabbath was first instituted for Israel, that was the thing. You don't gather food on that day. And here the disciples are breaking that. Technically, the Pharisees are right. So when the Pharisees accuse them and say, hey, what are you doing, breaking the Sabbath? Why are you doing this? They don't have a response. They give no response because they don't have any means of justifying themselves. Instead, Jesus steps in and answers for them. And he never actually addresses what the disciples are doing. Instead, he tells a different story about the would-be King David and how he broke a different law when he and the people with him were hungry. But when David broke that law to eat bread that was only allowed for priests to eat, he was never condemned or judged for it. He wasn't punished for it, and neither were his companions. So Jesus is making a parallel here between King David breaking the law to feed himself and others who were hungry, and the disciples feeding themselves when they were hungry, both breaking laws of God. And then he says, the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. In other words, the rule of the Sabbath does not rule over us, but is meant to serve us. Okay, next up, man with a shriveled hand. There's a few things I find really interesting about this story. Number one is Jesus was in the temple teaching. So he's over here teaching. The Pharisees are over here, trying to plot against him. In other words, they weren't paying attention to the teaching going on in the temple at the time. I have a friend, we'll call her Sally, who at the beginning of the lockdowns in March, actually, it might have been in April by this time. Anyway, at the beginning of the lockdowns, all of their meetings went to Zoom, like so many other people did. And at one point, Sally had a spreadsheet running on a piece of paper that she was doing. There was like 6 or 7 people in the Zoom call, and she was keeping a tally of every time someone on that call touched their face. How much of the content of that call do you think Sally was paying attention to while she was running that tally? Because there was one of them that I think the person hit like 40 times. I mean, I've just hit like 3 right now. 4. Yeah, probably not paying a lot of attention. Pharisees, not paying attention to the teaching that was going on. They were focused elsewhere. So anyway, Jesus knows what's up. So like the Pharisees are obviously expecting Jesus to do this on the sly, or kind of maybe after everybody leaves, or just kind of little quick thing. And the guy in the back, his hand just grows, nobody notices. Jesus knows what's up, and he just calls the guy right to the front. He's like, come on up here. Let's do this. This had to be really, really embarrassing for that guy. So he's already physically deformed, and keep in mind, it's his right hand. So not only is he deformed, but he's an outcast. Without getting into too much detail, in many cultures, you do not do most things like eating or shaking hands with your right hand with your left hand, because your left hand is reserved for cleaning yourself, right? So your right hand is the one for doing things with people. This guy's right hand was deformed. He couldn't do things with people. And aside from that, he couldn't work. Living in an agricultural society, there's not a lot you can do when you only have one hand. So aside from being a physical outcast, he was also a financial burden on his community. And Jesus brings him up to put this on full display for everybody. It had to be really embarrassing, right? That being said, it makes me think of when a kid is called to the front of the school, in like a school assembly or something. It's embarrassing. You got to stand up, walk in front of everybody, and then you're standing up there in front of everybody, in front of all your friends, and some people that aren't your friends, and they might be making fun of you. It's embarrassing. Until they give you the Student of the Month award for the whole school, and then every bit of that embarrassment just fades away in the euphoria of, and truly, like for the kid, and pride in how well they've done, and their work is paying off. And in this case, I'm sure every bit of that embarrassment faded away as the man was filled with both awe and thankfulness. Right? Totally worth it. Anyway, moving on. So Jesus calls the guy to the front, and then he asks them, is it okay to do good on the Sabbath, or is it a day for doing evil? And the answer is obvious. Like it's good to do good. We don't do evil, even if it's on the Sabbath. You know, but it's like a catch-22. It's like it's not. Is it okay to do good or is it okay to do evil? It's is it okay to do good or should you do evil? In other words, the book of James says if you know the good you ought to do and don't do it, it is sin. And that's what Jesus is saying here. If there is a good deed that needs done that is in front of you and you don't do it, then you are doing evil. So he's saying, is it better to break the rule in order to do good or sin by ignoring the need in front of you? Again, the answer is obvious, and so obvious, in fact, that Jesus doesn't even answer it. He just heals the guy. And the Pharisees get all mad, and then later they plot to kill him. I said that the two stories are related, and I think it's in that focus there. So the Pharisees are focused on trapping Jesus and trapping his disciples. They're looking for a reason to accuse. Jesus, in talking about King David and then talking about which is more important, doing good or doing, well, abiding by the law, which is ignoring the good in front of you to uphold the Sabbath, which, by the way, is not really the intent of the law, but nonetheless. In talking about that, Jesus shows that his focus is on meeting the needs of those around him. And in a way, he's telling the Pharisees that they need to do the same. Rather than focusing on whether the people are following the rules like they think they should, the Pharisees themselves should be more concerned about loving others and meeting their needs. Rather than focusing on what's right or wrong, he turns it on his head and says, loving others and helping them is right, even if it breaks a rule. Ignoring others' needs, even if it's to uphold a rule, is wrong, is evil or sin. How easy is it for us to become the Pharisees in these stories? Especially those of us who have been in the church for a while. It can be really easy to focus on what other people are doing wrong rather than trying to figure out how we can help them. Instead of love, we tend to offer judgment. Instead of compassion, condemnation, nitpicking, criticism. We can be so focused on what is right or even what's fair that we neglect the higher law of loving our neighbor as ourselves. Love God and love one another. All the laws and the prophets, all the rules, regulations, all the social norms and the mores, everything is secondary to loving God and loving one another. And if we neglect those at the expense or in the name of keeping up a rule or a law or doing what is fair, then we are in the wrong. I'm sure that if you spent a solid 30 seconds, you could probably think about how this applies in the world around you right now. There are so many ways that this plays out, both historically and currently. This idea of focusing on rules or focusing on what is fair as opposed to focusing on the needs of people has been really prominent lately. Unfortunately, it would take me a solid 3 hours to unpack most of that. Um, if you would like a conversation about how we can focus on loving one another as opposed to living as a slave to rules, my phone is on. I'm open. Um, but otherwise, I would challenge you to spend a few minutes thinking about how this applies, and how we can love one another despite what might otherwise seem to be right. How, yeah, living within the spirit of the law as opposed to being ruled by the law. Colossians says make allowance. It's Colossians 3:13 says make allowances for one another's faults. In other words, live generously towards one another. Uh, live with an attitude of loving one another and in compassion for others. Love God, love one another. Everything must come secondary. I'm going to pray and I'm going to say adios. Father, uh, Father, forgive me for the times that I am focused more on what is correct or right as opposed to what is good and loving. Uh, Father, use each of us to love our neighbors as ourselves, to show compassion and kindness, to be your ambassadors in this world of love and holiness and goodness. In the name of Jesus, I pray. Amen. Adios.